Hello, everyone, and welcome to a post-Thanksgiving story about the first Thanksgiving. I hope your Thanksgiving was as good as mine. So, what is Thanksgiving, and when was the first one? Well, we all more or less have an idea because all of us in school cut out construction paper hats and Indian headdresses and danced around and talked about the first Thanksgiving, where the Indians and the pilgrims all sat down at a very nice table and had turkey and talked about how they had just founded a country. That, surprisingly, is not what happened. We must go all the way back. Of course, history is always more complicated than elementary school pageants make it. And that's sort of okay because we can't get into too many complex details with our favorite second and third graders, but now we're all adults, and I think it's time that we finally understand that Thanksgiving is not a simple, always been there, founding of America holiday. When was the first Thanksgiving, and what is the big deal? So this image we have here is the popular image of what the first Thanksgiving was. It is the Indians and the pilgrims all sitting down at a table, and they're sort of in this idyllic pastoral thing, and they're all coming together and they're praying to God, and everything is great. It's not quite that simple. They probably didn't call it Thanksgiving, right? Historically, the idea of a giving of thanks or a day of Thanksgiving was one in which the participants wanted to fast and not eat to show gratitude to God that for something good that had happened, for something pleasant that had happened to them, or to mourn something. So they would have a day of thanks and they wouldn't eat in that day. It was a very somber, very calm, very fundamentally basic day. So why do we call it Thanksgiving? Did the pilgrims call it Thanksgiving? Well, that's part of the trick. They weren't pilgrims. They didn't call themselves pilgrims. They weren't even Puritans. They were a different part of the Puritans who were basically called the separatists. They were so Puritan, they wanted to totally remove themselves from the situation in England. They had to go over to Europe first, and finally, to get away from it all, they petitioned the King of England, James, who was persecuting them for some land in the New World. And he was like, sure, whatever, just go. Just get out of my hair and get out of England. So they do go across to England. And you can see on this map that's of what is now Massachusetts, you have the neat little hook over here that forms Cape Cod. But they landed somewhere first at the end of the land there, and it wasn't very suitable. So they came to an area and landed there and decided to form a settlement. Now, they landed here because they were sort of guided by someone who had said, this can be good land, and they landed and saw basically skeletons and the remains of people. The town where they landed, they called Plymouth after Plymouth, England, but there had actually been a village there, a native village there before called Patuxent. And at Patuxent, there had been an epidemic that swept through and had basically killed everyone there. So Plymouth was originally a native village. How did these people die? Because the pilgrims, the separatists, were not the first people to come to what became the Massachusetts colony. The Indians in this area had known about and had been trading with Europeans and especially the English for about 100 years. They knew what was going on. They had interactions with the Indians before. And, of course, these interactions resulted in the spread of disease, of European diseases, into native populations. And as we know, that never ends well. And there had been a massive epidemic in this area between about 1614 and 1619 that led to the deaths of anywhere from 80 to 90% of the population of this eastern Massachusetts colony area, which means that there was a significant amount of depopulation. So when the separatists landed, there wasn't a lot of resistance from the native tribes, and they established their colony there. When they landed, they met very quickly with the tribe called the Wampanoag, who were the dominant tribe in this area. And this is where it gets very interesting, because the Wampanoag were very suspicious of the separatists because they had been interacting with the English. The disease had followed the English there very recently. As I said, this village had been wiped out where Plymouth was established. And so they were very leery and weren't too sure. But then the chief of the Wampanoag, a fellow named Massasoit, began to realize these English have some strength, they have some weapons. I need some allies with my troubles with other tribes, especially the tribe to the west of there, the Narragansett. And so the Wampanoag wanted to use the English against the Narragansett as sort of this balance of power situation. And so Massasoit decided to interact with these newly landed English colonists. So Massasoit decided to go and meet with the English, and he had someone with him by the name of Squanto, as we call him, or Tisquantum, which is probably what his real name was. He was, however, not a Wampanoag. He was from the village that had been eliminated, the Patuxent. And he had an amazing story. He had been captured back probably around 1612, 1613 by the English and had been sold into slavery in Spain to the Spanish by this English sea captain. He was treated very poorly in Spain, but a group of monastic folks purchased him from their Spanish overlords and decided to show them how to read and to write and basically be easier on them, right? So he was sort of saved from this life of slavery by the monks. He finds his way to England, and he lives in England for about a year or so until he's able to get on a ship that eventually brings him back to his home in what's now Massachusetts, and he arrives and realizes that his village has been totally wiped out by this epidemic. He is literally the last of his tribe, and so he goes to live with the neighboring Wampanoags. So when the separatists, led by a fellow named Bradford, come to meet with Massasoit this first time, they are totally shocked to hear someone speaking perfect English to them. This is Tisquantum. And because of his time in England and Spain, Tisquantum is sort of the go-between. He becomes an incredibly valuable and central part of the relation between the separatists and between the Wampanoag. And he shows people that they could cooperate. He lets Bradford know that Massasoit would like him as an ally. Bradford is very happy to have the natives serve as friends because the separatists had brought crops with them. They're not idiots. They know they're going to have to establish a colony, but the seeds and the crops they bring with them do not do very well in the climate and in the soil of Massachusetts. So they enter a starving time. Remember, they're not getting supplies from England the way some of the other colonies in the New World are. And they enter the starving time. Lots of people die at this. But Tisquantum, basically, it's not that he shows them how to plant crops. What he does is he brings them native crops, corn, beans, squash, things like that, and shows them how to plant it by putting a fish in a mound, the Three Sisters, as we know that they call it now. And he shows them how to use native crops to grow food that they can actually eat. And after Tisquantum shows them this, they're able to harvest things, and they have a pretty good harvest. And knowing how things work there now with the native crops, with the local topography and the local weather, they're able to make their colony begin to work. They are very thankful. So what they do is they get together and they establish a dinner that they want to have, a celebration with the Wampanoag. And so Massasoit sends some of his warriors, and these warriors bring a gift of 5 deer. And so we know that at this celebration, which lasted 3 days, not just dinner time, 3-day celebration, they have the deer, they have some of these basic crops, squash, beans and corn and the products that can come from those. They probably even have a little bit of seafood, mussels and things like that. They probably have some basic vegetables and fruits, maybe even some grapes and things. Native, domestic products that they're going to sit. And during this 3-day celebration, they sort of cement this relationship between the separatists under Bradford and the Wampanoags under Massasoit. That is what we consider the first Thanksgiving. Now, I can't go too far into the story about how things totally unravel after this point. Massasoit dies at some point. Bradford dies a little bit later. Tisquantum, realizing that he is the keystone in this relationship, begins to, we think, be a little bit duplicitous between the Massasoit and between the separatists, starts to get as much benefit as he can, and actually we think he may even try to take over leadership of the Wampanoags, but he is quickly shunted out of that. And a fellow by the name of Metacomet, who was Massasoit's son, eventually comes to be in charge of the Wampanoag. and the Wampanoag and the Narragansett and some of these other native tribes joined forces to fight against a new set of English colonists that have come over to sort of dominate the separatists, and we lead into something called King Philip's War, which is a very deadly, one of the deadliest wars in American history based on per capita casualties. But again, that's another story. Suffice to say that that first Thanksgiving happens. It's a 3-day celebration, and it eventually breaks down the relationship, and we get one of those tragic stories that is so common between colonizing Europeans and the Native Americans. Now, this does happen, and as time goes forward, people sort of look back on this, especially people in Massachusetts and New England, as representative of their first time in the New World. But it's not something that garners national attention and national celebration, but it does enter the mythology of New England and therefore sort of of the North. Time passes, and the United States gets into a little thing called the American Civil War. And during the third year of the war, President Abraham Lincoln is looking for something to bring unity to the United States and the people who are fighting this war to preserve the Union and eventually end slavery. And so he declares in 1863, after several Union victories at Gettysburg, at Vicksburg, and sort of to tie into his delivery of the Gettysburg Address, he declares this mythological holiday, Thanksgiving, to be something that is now a United States national holiday to be celebrated for Union victories in the war and eventually the assurance of Union victory in the war. And this is one of those great photographs. You can see soldiers in the field celebrating this other first Thanksgiving. And this could be construed as the first real Thanksgiving, the way we think of it, as a national holiday of giving thanks where we gorge ourselves on any available food. Well, from the time of the Civil War, the celebration of Thanksgiving only grows around that sort of note. You know, we start having feast on that day. It is a time for family to get together and to give thanks for what we all have. And this becomes especially important as we move into the 1930s and the 40s, of course, the Great Depression and World War II. And to modern Americans, there seems to be no singular image more important and more representative of the celebration of Thanksgiving than this Norman Rockwell painting, which I do absolutely love. Not just the idea that it has the classic turkey there that mom or grandma is serving up, but all the faces around the table just look absolutely enchanted with the delight, and that one guy over here in the corner just sort of glancing back. We think that's sort of a self-portrait of Rockwell. And so by the time you get to the 30s and the 40s, Thanksgiving is a very big deal nationally. It is something that has been certainly nationalized and almost politicized. And this gives us one of our interesting things that a lot of us go back when we watch Holiday Inn. It's a classic holiday movie. But there's a scene in there that shows a turkey on Thanksgiving moving back and forth between the Thursdays, between the third and the fourth Thursday in November. And, you know, like many other people I know, we watch this movie, we enjoy this movie, but we don't really get what that is. That's a joke that is past us at this point in the later 20th and early 21st centuries. So here's what that's about. Thanksgiving had normally been associated with the last Thursday of the month, going all the way back to when Abraham Lincoln declared it a national holiday. Well, during the Depression, later days of the Depression, FDR was put under pressure by some of the retailers who said, this year, Thanksgiving is like the last day of the month, the last day of November, and we need more shopping days if we're going to pull the economy out of this, so please do something about that. Well, people have scheduled lots of things. There have been games scheduled for Thanksgiving. There have been family gatherings. But FDR decides to use the executive authority and declare the third Thursday rather than the fourth Thursday as Thanksgiving. In 1939, this causes a huge amount of confusion that year. People don't know when Thanksgiving is. They don't know when to take off, when the games are going to be played, when the games are going to be broadcast. They don't even know when the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade is going to be because of this massive confusion. So to settle the issue, In 1941, there is actually a piece of legislation passed by Congress that declares the last Thursday of November shall henceforth and forever be Thanksgiving, which is when we celebrate it today. And now, of course, today, Thanksgiving looks like this. There is turkey on the table. There are lots of vegetables. There's lots of food. It's a cornucopia of plenty for which we should be thankful. And, having the turkey, I'm a ham person myself, but people think of turkey when they think of Thanksgiving. And one of the questions is, was there turkey at the first Thanksgiving, the one with the Wampanoags and the separatists? The answer is we don't know. The turkey is, of course, native to North America. There was turkey hunting that went on then. It was very plentiful. Some of the accounts from the separatists say that turkey was a plentiful game and that they did take some, but did they have it on that day? We don't know. But don't let that stop your enjoyment of this special day. There's lots of things tied to Thanksgiving. It's a way to celebrate togetherness. It's a way to celebrate victory in the Civil War. It's a way to celebrate alliances with Native Americans that later devolve into an incredibly deadly war. Thanksgiving, what you should know is that historically it comes with a lot of baggage. Just be aware of that. But as far as we go, as far as our families at home go, and as far as our History Center family goes, we want you to just make sure you enjoy that day and get your fat pants ready, because we are going to have a massive Thanksgiving celebration every year, folks. Happy Thanksgiving. We hope this has brought a little bit of enlightenment into your Thanksgiving weekend. We hope the holidays continue to be bright and safe and pleasant for you. And until we see you next time, stay safe, take care, and happy holidays.